Welcome to the second day. My name is Sorin, and for the last 7 years, I've been part of Adobe Identity Security Squad. My team, among other things, was tasked with protecting the login flows against malicious automated attempts to gain access to users' accounts. During the next minutes, I want to tell you the story of the first time we have encountered a botnet-powered credential stuffing attack. These attacks are one of the most tough challenges that we have faced so far. What botnets are, you may ask. Most of you already know. I'm going to tell you anyway. It's a set of internet-connected devices running one or more bots. Bots are malicious programs which allow the device to be remotely controlled by an operator. Botnets are every botnet, any respectable botnet, must have a widely distributed set of bots across geography. For example, botnets employed against Adobe's login page have had bots from almost all continents. I know that because I've specifically looked for Antarctica, and it looks like we haven't been attacked by Antarctica just yet. A decade ago, botnets were mainly used in distributed denial of service attacks, or DDoS. These attacks, while very powerful, they were taking down servers with superfluous requests. But it turns out that they weren't very cost efficient for the attackers. On top of that, companies have become more and more adept at stopping them. So botnets must be increasingly larger to be effective. So should we just wait for cloud providers to make botnet attacks obsolete? Not really, even though we have a lot of successful and nice stories about cloud companies stopping some very big and scary botnet distributed denial of service attacks. It turns out that botnets are also evolving and they are diversifying. Their expansion is being fueled by the Internet of Things phenomenon. So nowadays, botnets are being employed as HTTP proxies, credential stuffing attacks, for review manipulation, for spam advertising, bank fraud, and click fraud. Each of these is increasingly more cost efficient for an attacker. So does it take digital expertise to use a botnet? Not really. Right now, we can actually talk about a malware as a service industry. This industry enables almost anyone with a few dollars in their pockets, some spare time, and some very basic computer knowledge to become a cyber criminal. And as more and more of our lives happen online, the incentive for folks to become cyber criminals will only increase. So by now you probably are curious, how do you rent a botnet? I'm just kidding, I'm not going to tell you that. Some of you folks look like you already know. But instead, let's talk about credential stuffing, my area of expertise. So you may have heard about credential cracking. Credential stuffing is different. While credential cracking will use brute force to crack any password given enough time and compute power, credential stuffing is a different beast. It will take already leaked credentials, and the attackers will try them on various login pages. The expected success rate, that is the percentage of logins that are expected to succeed given a batch of credentials, is relatively low. It's somewhere under 1%. But this is relative, because there is no shortage of these leaked credentials. Past data leaks have made sure of this. There are even compilations of leaks. So the not so original name comb, or combination of many breaches, has more than 3.2 billion credentials. You can do the math. 1% of 3.2 billion probably is more than the total number of users that most applications have. It's available on torrent sites for free. Don't ask me how I know this. And 5 years ago, while we were defending Adobe against first credential stuffing attacks that weren't using botnets just yet, we noticed that there were some IDs that kept appearing in our logs. We had no idea what they meant. So what you do, well, when you're out of ideas, you just put the ID in Google search box and hit enter. And to our surprise, we had a result. We found something that looked like a configuration file, which was designed to hack Adobe's users. We searched further, and we actually found a tool that used that configuration file. It was called Sentry MBA. And right now, at that time, we realized that these folks have proper tools. They weren't just script kiddies. So, downloaded the application and found out that it has native support for proxies. It allows attackers to spoof user agents, and there are even detailed tutorials available on YouTube for free. I've included such a tutorial. Please don't use it. So, how do you stop such an attack? The best way is to ask users not to reuse their passwords across websites. Password managers can help you with that. But most likely, password reuse would be a problem as long as we're going to use passwords for authentication. And just look at the statistics. More than 80% of users, myself included, have reused password at least once. And I personally believe that the percent is higher. And 25% do that on almost all their accounts. But we have another approach, enabling two-factor authentication. Unfortunately, two-factor authentication is a hassle, and companies don't want to force it to their users. Adobe does the same, and because of that, only 13% of our logins are 2FA enabled. And this is not nearly enough to deter credential stuffing attacks. And, well, the third option is to detect and stop malicious login attempts. I know this is a lot easier said than done, but bear with me. Just imagine that we have such a magical service that we can, that will spot us our malicious login attempts. What can we do? Well, you'll say, show CAPTCHA. Not so fast, because bots are becoming more and more adept at solving CAPTCHA. On the average, I believe they do better than humans. Also, we can just block the login, but you have to make sure that your magic service is 100% sure, otherwise you'll upset a lot of folks. What we ended up doing at Adobe is to force 2FA on those logins that we flag as malicious. But even here, there is a catch. You can't do that. You can't just do that. Like, you have to challenge the login with a 2FA code before asking the user for passwords. Because if you're asking for password first, after the user entered the email or username, then an attacker will just know that they found the correct password, and I don't know, will try tomorrow. Probably your magic server will not work tomorrow. So far, we talked about attackers' tools. We have our own, and it's called Risk Assessment Service, or RA. And this is our magical service, which uses a rule engine to detect possibly malicious login attempts. And it has rules such as consider high risk any login attempt that comes from an IP, which in the last 5 minutes have more than 10 failed logins. We have, this is just an example, we have multiple such rules. And we also keep statistics for the last hour, the last day, and the last 30 days. And, oh, I hope you all had breakfast. So, doesn't this cupcake look delicious? If Adobe were in bakery business, that would be a welcome sight. However, we are using cupcakes as code words for security incidents. I don't know why. So prior to 2019, we were on a diet. We didn't have many cupcakes. And things worked well for us. But in October 2019, some alerts started to fire. There were failed login alerts that we put in place some time ago to detect login attempts, possibly fraudulent login attempts that were bypassing risk assessment. But up until now, we would have been able to detect one IP or user region or something like this to, as a marker of the attack. This time, login failures seem to come from IPs with very low past login failures. We were both troubled and puzzled. It was, what the heck is going on? It was just like almost all of users have been hit by amnesia. So our IP statistics became useless overnight. Later, we found that the login failures were distributed among many IPs, more than 10,000. But because we couldn't find the actual marker, we ended up enabling 2FA for everyone. We knew at that time that it was a temporary solution because the business was just around the corner asking why the logins have dropped. After the attack, there is a standard practice to reset the passwords for all the affected users. But because we didn't know which were the actual affected users, we ended up resetting passwords for everyone logging in during the attack window. And when we are resetting a password, we're actually sending an email to the user trying to explain them as calmly as possible what's happening. But we didn't know what was happening, so the message wasn't very clear. And you can imagine the wave of confusion that followed after we reset those emails, and yeah, you can say that the user experience was pretty bad, but that would be a huge understatement. On top of this, there are states that have legislation that requires Adobe to report such attacks if the number of affected users goes beyond a threshold. We didn't have to do that, but we were pretty close, I've been told. After we dealt with the fallout, we went back to audit logs trying to figure out what happened. Our first clue came from the fact that there were a lot of unique IPs that were used during the attack window. So the number of unique IPs raised sharply. This hinted us that there might be a botnet at play. The puzzle was complete when we actually saw that the users were also logging in, successfully or not, many times. And this was odd because we're trying to get users through the login page only once, and they also help us with that. They don't want to log in. And users that don't remember their password, they try 1, 2, 3 times, and then they're gonna go to password recovery flow. Those users didn't do that. Our Eureka moment came when we put those two pieces together, and we realized that attackers that use botnets, which depend on IoT devices, they have to give the same batch of credentials to multiple bots because they are not very reliable. And this was leaving some marks in our logs, but just about now we learned how to spot them. So suppose that we have a pair of users and the IP they use to log in. We can say that red and orange are related because user 1 uses them, and orange and yellow IP are related. But you can go a step further and consider all three IP related because orange is actually a bridge between the two other IPs. So what happens when we apply this algorithm to the data extracted during the attack? Well, we found that legitimate users do not have many IPs in common. So for them, we would find a very small family of IPs. But fortunately, this wasn't the case for botnets. So we identified a family that had more than 10,000 IPs. So we were actually, after the algorithm finished, we were looking our first botnet. We were having IPs of the first botnet. And what about VPNs, you may ask? And yeah, it's a good question. Again, fortunately, users using VPNs also do not share large enough sets of IPs to demonstrate botnet behavior. So time was of the essence. The winter holidays were approaching fast, and we didn't want to spend them resetting users' passwords. Probably they didn't want to receive our emails also. So we patched up the quickest thing that we could. We've implemented the algorithm as a Jenkins job. Every 15 minutes, we would download the past 2 hours of login data. We'll try to find the clusters, and big clusters we would feed back into the risk assessment service. Every login for the next few hours coming from those IPs would have been automatically challenged by 2FA before asking the users for passwords. To our surprise, the attacks didn't stop once we employed the defense. Well, probably attackers also have a day job, so they left the attack running overnight. And an even bigger botnet has been used. It had like 17,000 IPs. We stopped that too. And in fact, the bigger the botnet is, the easier it is for our algorithm to detect and stop it. But, of course, we had folks that didn't believe in our algorithm, and they were asking, how do you know that it really works? And I ended up showing them the same picture I'm showing you. You may observe in the low part the traffic that we are marking as low risk, and it looks like a wave. It's natural, it's boring, we like boring, and it's in stark contrast with blue and green, which they look like a tsunami. So this is botnet traffic that we had to stop. And to be fair, if you look closely, we still have some spikes of low-risk traffic. That means that our algorithm is not 100% accurate. Looking at the bigger picture, we can see that before the detector was deployed, we have a big number of compromised accounts that we had to reset. And the numbers dropped significantly, like almost an order of magnitude. And it continued to drop into 2021, but I can't boast about it because pandemic probably left some more opportunities for botnets to be used instead of credential stuffing. The system, as you have already seen, has its limitations. The algorithm needs warm-up. So it has to leave some malicious traffic through before it detects the attack. And the algorithm is also inefficient against small-scale botnets because they have the same IP set patterns as large organizations and users using VPNs. But for those cases, we still have our tried and tested IP-based rules. Also, we had problems with distributed monitoring system. Our colleagues in Adobe like monitoring their applications to see if they are working properly, and they have to go through the login page, and our botnet detected them. Solutions like New Relic Synthetics had to be allow listed so they can continue with their job. The algorithm has been designed for credential stuffing. It's not applicable to other types of botnet-enabled threats that I have shown before, but the idea behind it that all these botnets must make use of IoT devices which are not very reliable can be used against them in other scenarios. What I want folks to take with them home is that don't reuse passwords. And probably this is not enough. You should also tell your friends to not reuse passwords. Well, you can show the passwords online if you, if they don't believe you. For us on the server side, logging is the key. It might be hard to do it right, it may be expensive, but in the end, without logging, we wouldn't have been able to respond to these threats. And while there is no perfect solution to fighting botnets, the good news is that you don't need one because there are no perfect botnet attacks either. So I'm Sorin, and I'm wishing you all a botnet-free day and Christmas. They tend to happen during Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you, Sorin. It is now time for questions. Keep in mind that the first 3 questions are going to get a hat. So please look up for my colleagues that are going to pass you the microphone.
Hello, Sorin. There's a trend about passwordless being more secure than passwords. And when can we see it put in practice, like drop password-based authentication once and for all? Or can we see it?
That's a very good question, and I'm gonna ignore that. You wish for me to go out of job. WebAuthn, I think it's called a standard. It's the password killer. However, it hasn't been implemented by all of big players, and I'm looking at Apple. Probably they needed some time to find a good name for it. They call it passkeys. It's their name. So I believe, now the road is open, and probably in a few years we're gonna have to remove all our combination of many breaches because they'll be useless. Sorry.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I have one question. You talked about internal processes, and I would like to know if you share this information of this analysis with your partners, with your clients, or is it only internal process?
We only share it internally. The idea is that probably the information was shared with other partners because Adobe is in partnership with other players in the region, mostly in the software industry. So I don't expect Adobe to share it with folks from the energy sector or things like this. But I personally wasn't involved in this. I'm not in the team that would do such thing. I don't have the relations, so I can only speculate that the information was shared. But by now, when we found that there was tons of for free, it means that probably for a year those credentials were already on the dark internet, and most people that were interested, they already knew it. So yeah.
Hi. How do you differentiate here? How do you differentiate the request from bots from the real traffic? Because lately, in the wild, I'm seeing pretty good botnets. I mean, even J3 fingerprints and all those blend with the real traffic. I'm talking about botnets that in every 20 to 30 requests are changing IPs, headers, and everything. They really look pretty legit.
Yeah, thank you. Very good question.
Because your algorithm is pretty cool buzzwords, but can you give us some details?
Yeah, so the main idea is that we try to look for the algorithm. I think it's called connected graphs in a bipartite. If you want, probably didn't want more buzzwords, but the idea is that if we could draw a line between IPs and users, we would go as much as possible in our algorithm, and we'd consider all the IPs caught in that line as being part of something. And then if the set is big enough, we just consider it as that something being a botnet. Because on the lower end, that something can mean a big company. And we have troubles with universities, for example. They start a lab, they give the wrong passwords to all the students, our alerts fire up. So at that level, and we are talking about hundreds of IPs, when we are talking of thousands, then we can say with certain that this is botnet behavior. But to be fair, between 100 and 1,000 is a gray area where I'm not sure. And because I'm not sure, I can't use the hammer to just block the login. What I'll do, I'll hinder the user and throw a 2FA. Because I can do that. That's the advantage of being the owner of the application.
All right. Thank you so much, Sorin.